say hello and welcome to everybody. My name's Steve, and I'm here today to present a quick overview of the technical interview process, which I've called Conquering the Technical Interview. But before we begin, a little about me. I've been in the industry well over 15 years. I won't say any more or you'll start trying to guess my age. And I've held a number of roles, from back in the day being a junior dev through to lead engineer or technical lead. Different companies have lots of titles that mean virtually the same thing. But each time I run the gauntlet, which is the interview process, I'm reminded it can be a minefield. For the unprepared traveler, it can be fatal, which is why I see it much like a game of Jumanji. I'm sure you're all familiar with those films. We'll assume you've brushed up your CV, dusted off your LinkedIn profile, and maybe even uploaded your CV to CV Library, Reed, Indeed, or other websites that are applicable in your territory, and you're ready to conquer the interview process. So let's kick off. Your mission is to secure employment as, and then your job title. What is it you're looking to do? And let's just pause here for a moment. Are you clear about what you're looking to achieve for the role that you're focused on for your next assignment? Are you focused on a particular sector of the industry? For example, there are a lot of gaming and gambling jobs out on the boards, job boards at the moment. Are you comfortable with being in that sector? Are you more focused on fintech or medical health tech or discovery science roles? Where is it that you're looking to focus on? Because your time's precious, right? And you don't want to waste it focused on a role that you discover is not really for you, when on the same job board with a couple of clicks or scrolls, there are multiple roles that you really would like to focus on. So let's get into the pre-mission briefing. The problem, let's face that problem head on. How do I convince a company I'm a good fit for the role they're advertising? And this is an issue that I face as a more senior dev. This is an issue that you will face as a junior dev, maybe even somebody that's getting into their first role. Maybe you've been working in hospitality, retail, or something other than a coding job, and you want to secure that first post. Don't be scared. There are plenty of people, as Kimberly's highlighted, that transitioned from one type of work from one sector to another into more of a code environment. It's not a problem. But where do you begin? Am I good enough? Is the recruiter on my side? Or are they just this person that's out there that I'm worried about, that I don't know that they're really pulling on my team? And lastly, can I handle the rejection? Now, I just want to pause here for a sec. Unless you have a niche skill that immediately aligns with a company, the first company that you see on a job board, or somebody that approaches you directly via LinkedIn, let's say, unless you have that niche skill and they, after chatting to you, immediately say, yes, great, you're a fantastic fit for that job, you are facing the possibility of rejection. And in our personal lives, when we hit rejection for reasons, some of us handle that really well and seem to bounce past it with very few scars and scratches. And others of us really take it very personally and struggle with it. And so please understand that we all face it, from somebody that's applying for a CTO, C-suite type role, through to the most junior person in the business. They're all going to face the possibility of rejection unless they have this niche thing, which I would like to suggest is pretty unusual. So don't feel bad. We're all in the same boat. So let's have a quick look at our roadmap to success. And I would say, as a quick disclaimer here, if you're getting into a company, interacting with a company that's a startup, that's very small, they may not have all these levels of the recruitment process. And if you're into a bigger company, they may have these and more. These were just the ones that I've interacted with in the past few weeks as I obtained a new role. I'm 1 month into my new role. I went through the application process, and then it's common for recruiter screening. So a recruiter may come along to you on LinkedIn and say, hey, Steve, or hey, Bob, or hey, Julie, I've seen your profile and I think you'd be a really great fit for this. Have a chat with them. And then there's the first interview, probably with an in-house talent team. Then we're moving through to slightly more technical conversations. Maybe there's a tech test. Maybe they're going to review that quietly on the side or informally in the background, or maybe they're going to arrange a meeting to talk it over with you. Then you get to meet some of the team, probably get to meet a manager or another director type person, maybe the managing director if it's a slightly smaller company. And they're looking for fit with the company values and so on. And then they'll give you the outcome. So how do you manage the interview process? For the unprepared traveler, you probably look on Reed or Indeed or maybe LinkedIn, and you select a bunch of jobs and you fire your CV at them. You sit back and you hope. I would like to suggest that that's pretty chaotic and that actually you need to treat this more like you were on the BBC TV series The Apprentice, and Alan Sugar has rocked up and given you, metaphorically, £1,000, but actually it's your time rather than currency. And he's watching for how you manage this before you're hired, those golden words that you want to hear. And if you don't log which recruiter you spoke to or which person in the talent team you spoke to, when you log that application with them and the various interactions you've got with them, I'm going to suggest that this is probably not a one-horse race, that you're probably looking at several companies' open roles, vacancies at the same time. And so you need to log them, because equally, you need to put things on a calendar. I'm going to suggest that you're probably not fresh out of university with the luxury of the recruitment boards all laid out in front of you and your Xbox or PlayStation or other distraction of your choice, where you have all the time in the world and you can log whichever job interviews you need to in your day, and it really doesn't matter. You've got a good memory and you know when you're busy and when you're not. I'm going to suggest that you're a busy person and you're probably working in a role, whether part-time or otherwise, it doesn't matter. And you need to know when those interviews are scheduled for, because you can't double book yourself. You don't want to overstretch yourself. And really importantly, you don't want to be like that younger sibling or child in your family that's constantly pestering. When am I, what's the time? Because the recruiter has several jobs on their plate. The in-house talent team has several jobs they need to look after. And they won't appreciate you constantly pulling on their apron string saying, when are we doing a thing? Remind me, you need to manage those things yourself. And lastly, don't be tempted to blanket bomb every opportunity. As I said at the beginning, focus on the sectors that you would like to work in, the opportunities that you want to take. And if you're a junior or mid-level person, it's probably not appropriate for you to focus on a lead role or a higher engineering manager, CTO, because you're probably trying to grab something that's slightly out of reach. I've done that myself when I was younger. I was eager. It's probably not a good idea. And why is it not a good idea? Well, if you then focus on a role with that company in a few weeks' time or a couple of months' time, and they've already seen you as somebody that you're not, that's going to color your opportunity, your chances of gaining that opportunity, in the present. And so I would say, be careful with how you approach companies and don't blanket bomb things. Take it easy, because they may have a role in X months, years' time, and you don't want to be remembered as somebody that was a no-hoper. So let's introduce a few of our key game players. You may meet a recruiter, particularly if you're on LinkedIn or Reed or Indeed. Recruiters have some kick-ass tools that, unless you've seen them in action, they drill down into the data. They shine a light on the things that the recruiter cares about. And when you've seen them kicking off, you'll understand that better. But just for the purposes of this, understand they have tools and they will approach you. And they're likely to phone screen you. Don't be offended, but they want to check that the person they're putting forward in front of the company they're working with isn't immediately going to be showed the door. Because if they're sent away straight away, it will demonstrate to that company that a recruiter doesn't even know what they're talking about. They can't find a candidate that's suitable. So they're going to phone screen you. And when they come back to you in that first pitch, they're likely to say, what salary do you want? what do you want at the moment? Tell me about your current role. And they're going to seem quite intense. And I would suggest put the brakes on that for a minute and say to them, I'm interested in what you'd like to talk to me about. Do you have a job description? Because if they don't have a job description immediately available, that for me demonstrates that they may be chancing their arm. They've seen some action away in the corner and they want in because they know that they should be able to place someone at that job, but they haven't actually talked to the company. They're just wanting to push a candidate forward. So ask them for the job description and don't tell them how much salary you would like to earn straight out. Find out what the job's about first and then say, I'm thinking of in the region of X. What do you think? Then we move on to Clara. She's from the talent team. And although she's going to screen you again and find out that you're actually a good fit for their role, she's a key player. Either of these two people could be your best friend through this process. And if they're doing their job really well and diligently, they should be able to guide you and shepherd you and tell you, well, the next round in the process is this. And these are the things that you should be looking out for. And they're key people. So I would make friends with them and listen to them. But let's move on. Sam, our team lead, that person's going to ask you more technical questions. They're going to drill down into the Python or the Java or the React, whatever it is that you're working with on a tech level. And they're going to make sure that you know what you're talking about and that you will be a good fit into the team. And then lastly, we've got Carol, the CTO, and she's probably up for checking that you align with the company values and objectives and that you're a good team player. And above all, you're a good communicator. So our first contact, you've made your application or the recruiter has come direct to you and you're having that famous Zoom call, which we all love. And you need to get across to the recruiter exactly what it is that you can bring to the table. And you need to make sure that you've heard confirmation of the things that you're looking for. And again, they'll ask you about salary. And I always say, in the region of X, but what do you think? What's the industry for here? Because we love our recruiter friends. They fulfill an important role, part of the process, but they are on commission largely. So they will want you on the best salary they can get because that increases their chances of commission very often. So do be aware of that. And if you feel they're overselling you, tell them, have that conversation with them and ask them all the questions that you need to ask. But again, track the progress on your worksheet. When's the next touch point? When's my next interview? When will I hear back from this company? So now we're going to get technical. We're getting into the programming language that you're using or the design skills that you're bringing to the table. And in this round, the person's going to ask you, the interviewer is going to ask you about your career. They're going to ask where you've been today. And if you're a junior, don't be shy. They know this. You're at the table because you're a junior. And if this is your first coding role, but you've previously worked in retail or hospitality, don't be embarrassed. If you were at uni and you've only had an internship, don't be embarrassed. Talk about the times that you helped the team. Talk about the value that you brought to the business. Deep dive into the role with the interviewer and have some initial answers to tech questions. Although I'm a more senior developer now because I've more experience under my belt, I still write down answers to the most common interview questions, bullet pointed answers, stick them on a post-it note and put them somewhere in view because the best of us get nervous in a technical interview. And when they say, Steve, can you explain? I'm like, yeah, great. I've got that on the wall. I'll quickly flick my eyes over to where those answers are. And then I return knowing that I'm going to give them the right answer. And have your questions ready to ask whoever you're interviewing with in that round. So into the tech test, which for some is absolutely the worst round. So I would say, give yourself enough time. If you've a really busy schedule because you're a hectic calendar, maybe you're a working parent and you know that you've got to make time for children. You know that you've got to make time for people you care for if you're a carer. I take my hat off to you. You're busy, but you still deserve the job that you're going for. So be clear about the time that you've got. Understand where your free time is. And don't try and work till 1 a.m. and then be up again at 6 a.m. because you're going to make yourself tired. So be fair to yourself at the same time. But understand how to submit your work. If you're being given the tech test as a sheet of paper, a PDF, by a recruiter or an in-house talent team, they may not be fully versed with GitHub or GitLab. So understand how you need to submit your work. Understand that it may be through GitHub or GitLab. It may be low tech, which I've experienced multiple times, where it's a zip file that you would just email and send back to them. And understanding that at the start of the process means that you don't have to worry about that at the end when you are up against that deadline that you promised you'd have it back and you can't get anyone on email or by other means to find out how you send it back. Consider your test strategy, which is why I've got an illustration of someone drawing things on a sheet of paper. Write it down, print out that PDF and understand how you're going to architect what you're going to produce. No matter what problem you're solving, understand what you're doing. Unless it's a basic math problem, a drawing is really useful because you've got to sense check that you have completed what they've asked you to do before you submit it. And if you don't, you run the risk of them saying, well, it was great, but you completed all these optional stages, but you didn't do the mandatory things that we were looking for. And I'm sorry, we're going to have to let you go from the interview process. We're not comfortable with that. And also, if asked, how would you extend the code? If you're designing a home screen with a form on it, how would you extend that out of it? If you're designing a microservice for back-end code, what's the next logical step that you would think of? So the technical review. For those of you that are writing code, that have written code, you'll be familiar with the illustration there. It's of a diff in GitHub. And that's really what this technical review round boils down to. The company want to see, how do you react to a code review? Are you teachable? Are you humble? Or are you going to start banging your drum, telling them that you're a senior and you've been in this business for so many years? And because that's not what they want to hear. They want to hear collaboration, teachable, humble, all those good keywords that we know are a nice attribute in our colleagues and in ourselves. But be ready to explain why you solved the problem the way you did, because as I said, unless it's a straightforward math problem, there's definitely going to be more than one way to have done it. And just because the company always solve it this way doesn't mean your approach is wrong. Make notes during the call or afterwards and understand what they didn't like about your situation or what they highlighted as really strong in your approach, because it's likely you're going to be writing more than one code test, and therefore you can hone it as you go along, because that's the name of the game. And I like to include a README file with maybe the diagram that I alluded to a moment ago, or some other text saying how I would go about running the application, whatever it is I've built for them. Because during the interview that you have, you can very gently say, I've included that in the README file, and then go on to answer the question that they had. But that highlights to the interviewer, if they didn't bother looking, that you were diligent and you included a README file, and that will gain you extra points in the background very often. And again, have your questions. How does this code test fit into the work that the team often get involved in? You know, why is this code test important to you if that's not already been covered? So then move on to the team interview. And this really is a chance for you to make friends. That really is the name of the game here. You're showing the rest of the team that you are a friendly, outgoing person, even if you think you are the introvert of all introverts. Really do your best to make friends. Talk about examples of how you've helped a team. It doesn't matter whether it's a retail example, an internship example, an example from hospitality industry. How did you help the team? How did you help the customer, the end user? Why do you want the job? Are you able to vocally express why you want that job? And active listening here is really important. As the team talk about the role and they interact with you, listen to what they're telling you. And if you can, scribble a few notes on a sheet of paper as they're talking. are things you want to come back to. Now, sometimes it's really key to ask that question there and then because you're seeking clarity on what they said. But otherwise, grab that point, save it for the end. And when they say, do you have any questions? Yeah, you can say, going back to the point you spoke about a few moments ago, I'm interested to, and that's major goal. That is really, I can't say how valuable that is because it shows the company, the team colleagues that you listened, you valued what they said, and you want to build on top of that. And it rolls nicely into your questions. Then it's time to meet the manager or a CTO or managing director, whatever level is suitable for the company. This person is wanting to understand that you know about the company values and objectives before the interview. So I'm thinking back now to where I said you want to make friends with the recruiter or the talent team person. When they say to you, well done, you've got through to the next round, it's on Thursday and you're meeting the manager, the managing director, whatever it is, and you're talking to Anna, then say to them, do you have a page on the website that you think would be particularly useful? Or what other resources do you think would be particularly useful when I talk to Anna? And hopefully they will say to you, we have a great section on the website about X, or go and read up on thing. Ask them for details. And as a caveat, if you're applying to a startup that really doesn't have any website at the moment, more than just one marketing page, look for other companies that are in the same sector and read down their company values, because they're probably going to be largely the same. And then if all else fails, work on the basis of collaboration, helping the customer achieve a problem that they couldn't achieve without us, and all those other sort of more obvious things that you would expect the company to want. But be cautious and be led with your active listening as you work through that conversation with the manager or CTO. Be ready to explain why you and how you see yourself fitting into the company, why you're a good choice. What is it you will bring to the table? And I would suggest that you sit in front of a mirror or just quietly by yourself somewhere else, and you actually speak out loud the answers that you would want to give, because they're crucial. And practice is great. I unashamedly practice those things before I go into a round of interviewing. And if you've multiple interviews happening subsequently on different days, or maybe in the same day, and you run into a question that you can't answer from somebody like this, think afterwards about how you would have answered it, and then take that new approach to your next interview with a manager or a CTO. So, time for the outcome. Unfortunately, it wasn't this time. We're all going to face that. I faced that in the last few months when I ran through some interviews. I even went back to them mid-process and said, it's not working for me. I'm sorry, not this time. I'd love to work for you again in the future, maybe, but not this time. And we always think that it's a case of the company are controlling, or the recruiter is controlling the process, but you are equally in the driving seat. And if you feel that the role isn't for you, put your hand up, pull the rope and say, I'm sorry, it's not working for me. I don't wish to proceed. Don't feel you're causing offense with the company. You're not, honestly. And if they come back to you because they've seen something in you that they like, you can then have another conversation with them and say, well, you suggested that I would need to learn Java, and actually I spend part of my time caring and the rest of my time working on this role. It's quite hectic for me, and I don't feel that I would bring enough to the table with the role I'm trying to learn if I've also got to learn Java. I feel you'd be better with another candidate. Great. You've shown that you're a team player and that you're thinking of the company, so it's not a problem. Think of ways that you can change your answers. We've talked about that, but discover what didn't go well. Why is the company saying you weren't a good fit? And if they send you that generic email that says, Dear X, it didn't happen for us this time, regards. If you've got a relationship with that in-house recruiter, email them and say, I'm confused as to why. Would you mind helping me understand? I respect the answer. I'm not trying to be combative and change your mind, but I would just like some feedback. Thank them and keep positive. Very easy to say at the time for me now, and at the time, maybe harder for you to do, but Again, you don't know when you'll interact with this company in the future. And if they've got you down as somebody that really got quite grumpy with them when you were told no, they're probably going to knock you out of any future processes, because they will remember. People work in companies for 5, 10 years. And even if it's not noted on the system, they will remember that you weren't a great team player. And if they've got to whittle 100 CVs down to 10, that may be the reason they have. But on the flip side, you did it. Hooray! Again, understand what went well and what didn't go so well. Because if you accept this role, you've a probation period to complete. It's very unusual these days for there to be no probationary period. And if you keep running over the same mistakes during that probationary period that you made in your interview, the things that didn't go so well, and you show that you demonstrate that you aren't teachable, that you won't learn new tricks and improve your approach, you might not make that probationary period, and then you'll be back on the interview candidates list. Real quick, understand the offer. What is it they're actually offering you? And if you are looking at a part-time role, don't be ashamed to make sure that the money that you thought you were getting is the money that you are getting. I once, for reasons, was part-time, and I'd said to them, I wanted, let's say, 30,000 for 3 days a week. Let's just say that's what it was for the sake of our conversation. But instead, the interviewer heard 30,000 pro rata. That's very different. And I signed the contract, and then I came to them after my first pay packet and I said, hang on a minute, my math doesn't work out here. And they said, well, it does, because it was 30,000 pro rata, and you're only doing 3 days, therefore it equals this divided by 12. So make sure you understand the offer. Make sure that if the offer specifies that you need to be on the firing line, as it were, that you're comfortable with that. That's the role you were expecting. If you're going to be on the support desk 1 day out of 5, you need to know that up front. And if you've got another process running that's still ongoing, and you know that you're in you feel that you're in a really good position with this, and that you really want to finish it off, get an outcome from that company as well, because feedback is a beautiful thing. And I would encourage you to go after it as often as you can. Be clear if you have another process running and how long it will take. And you may feel as a junior role that you aren't able to do this, and it's only the luxury of senior people that can do this. Talk to them. If they've a problem with you doing it, they're going to tell you. And then you will be able to make a call on whether, if you dropped this and you didn't get the other role, what does that mean for you? And you'll be able to make a good decision. And again, thank them. So let's focus on accepting the offer. It's great. You can go and talk to your bestie and find out what they think and have your favorite beverage with them while you talk. But I would suggest that you want to find a trusted friend who has a technical understanding of what it is that you are getting into. They don't need to work in exactly the same sector that you're looking at, but they just understand a tech business. Explain the roles. Be really emotional with them as you're explaining it. Don't be afraid of that, because that might shine a light on which role it is, if there's 2 on the table, that you are more excited about. Listen to your friend's opinion. There was no point in telling them about these roles if you're going to talk all over them as they're trying to explain their thoughts and opinions to you. And if you have gaps in your knowledge because they say, well, is that job working to a calendar year holiday, or is their holiday year April through to March, and you think to yourself, actually, I don't know the answer to that. It does matter to me because of reasons. Go back to the company and say to them, could I just check, is your holiday year January to December, whatever it is? And they will be delighted that you're asking them questions, because that demonstrates that you're really serious about the role that's on the table. And if you need more time for your thoughts and deliberations, or because the other process that you wanted to complete has overrun, communicate clearly with them that you need more time. So let's look at a few gameplay hacks, which is akin to staying alive. Focus only on this round of the process. We've talked about multiple rounds, and you might be fretting about the interview, the technical test, or the interview with the tech lead or the managing director, whichever it is. but focus only on the single round, because it genuinely is, for me, like a game of Jumanji. Those rhinos, they're out to trample you. And if you aren't on your A game in every round, you will get trampled. And as Mike Lingy said, it's not over. We're getting closer to our big goal, but we're not there yet. Game by game, pitch by pitch, we have to focus, and who knows what might happen. It's exactly the right attitude. Listen, ask, and don't assume. And especially if the interviewer on the Zoom call, suddenly your internet connection drops and you can't hear them, or they have a strong accent and they're speaking very softly, say to them, I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that. I think my connection crackled. Would you mind repeating that? Because I've fudged through that in an interview process, and I gave them the wrong woolly answer, and I was shown the door. It's really easy. It's a big temptation. You don't want to be that guy that, or that girl that has said, I didn't hear you. You don't feel that you have that right. But yeah, ask them. I'm sorry, I didn't hear. I'd like to answer the question, but could you just repeat it? And then set up a vanilla test app if you're working with maybe React or the equivalent in Python or Java. Check it works. Load in some packages. Maybe I'm a front-end person, so I've loaded in maybe Axios or TypeScript or React Query, and I made sure that that all plays nicely together, because if that tech test requires you to work on their preset environment, great. But if you know you've got to set that up as the first job, why not get ahead of the curve and have it set up in your own time when you're perfectly relaxed and you're not fretting about the fact that they're timing you and that you've got 48 hours to get this back to them? Always pre-prepare questions for your interview round. Please, unless circumstances have conspired against you, don't rush in to your home office or other environment where you're going to be in that interview process and haven't given yourself time to plan. That's a pretty toxic place to be usually. And this is my golden nugget, which is not my question. I was given this by a really great recruiter while I was gaining my current job. Are there any technologies or attributes you think I'd need for this role which we haven't discussed? If you ask that question to the person who's guiding the tech questions, and also the CTO or manager that you meet as the last touch point that you will have with the company before they make their decision, it's really difficult for them to come back to you and say something like, remember, I'm a front-end guy. Hey, Steve, we really loved the things that you talked about. We thought your answers were really strong, but you don't have any Java knowledge. So I'm sorry, it's not for us this time. Because now I can say to them, thanks, Mike, for your honest appraisal, or thanks, Anna, for your honest appraisal. We did touch on this in the interview, and you didn't mention at any point that I needed Java. And whilst I accept your answer, I'm really keen to be part of this. Is there a way out of this, stalemate, this sort of standoff? Because you asked the question in the interview, and now they've come back to you. It's a conversation. Don't be combative with them, but have that conversation. Fight your corner. And lastly, keep the champagne in the back of the fridge. And for me, even when I've got offers on the table, and even when I've accepted an offer, I will celebrate. But largely, I will keep the champagne in the back of the fridge until I've passed my probation period. Because until then, although you're working in the company, although you've accepted the offer and they've extended that to you, which is fantastic, do celebrate it. You're not out of the woods until you've signed off that probation period. Because if you relax too much in that period of time, if you don't fulfill what they need you to do, they have a very quick escape hatch. And equally, you're in the driving seat. So in that probation period, if they start asking you to do things that you didn't feel were within the scope of the role that you've taken on, ask questions of your line manager or other buddy, whoever it is that's been appointed to shepherd you through this process, and say, I keep being asked to go on the support desk, and I wasn't aware that was part of my role. Is that just something you put people on as part of their onboarding process so they have familiarization of the product? Or is it something that I'm going to do as an ongoing thing as I work with you? Because I wasn't aware that I'm needing to do that. And if it's something that you're really super uncomfortable with going forward, don't be afraid to look back into the marketplace and find an alternative role that fits your expectations and behaves more as you had expected, and move across to that role. Yeah, the probation period is your period of time to sync with that company and just double check to verify that everything is going as you would expected. So that brings me through to the end of what I had prepared. I hope you found it useful and would be very happy to take some questions.
Hi, thank you so much. We've had a few questions come in, which is really great, and lots of people saying how useful that was. Amazing.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. First question is red flags at a company. So you mentioned that, at any point you can pull out and change your mind and, say this is no longer a fit for me. What type of things are red flags to you?
Okay, great question. Thank you to whoever asked that. I would say that there are probably three different things. The first group are very personal to you. If you understood that the business is working in a particular sector, and then through the interview process, it transpires that they're trying to, let's say, get into the gambling sector. And let's just say you have a personal agreement with yourself that you don't want to work in that for reasons. That's great. You need to respect your own values. And so having discovered that they're trying to move into that area, you decide that you want to pull out. Fine, that's personal to you. There may be other things that are personal to you. Secondly, the way that they treat you in the interview process. If they are seeming to be reasonably aggressive or unresponsive to your emails and inquiries as you move through the interview process, it could just be that they're wanting to bait you and see how you react to a situation. That's fine, as long as it's done in a professional way, and as long as it's a one-off or maybe a two-off. But if they continually do it to you, I would suggest that their way of working and what they see as a good team culture is probably a toxic way of working, and you might not want to be in that. And thirdly, if they suddenly pull other technical attributes or responsibilities into the job description that have not been explained or made obvious in earlier rounds, use your judgment. And this happened to me. They genuinely said to me, "We expect you to learn Java." I'll be honest, at that moment in time, back in the day, I didn't have the headspace to learn Java. I knew I couldn't. And so I said to them, on the basis that you want me to learn Java and that is an expectation, I doubt I will pass my probation period. And therefore, I think you would be better off with more of a full stack developer that has got Java under their belt as well. And so don't run to the door and drop yourself out of the process because you started this for reasons. But don't be afraid to take that exit if you see any of these things. Did that answer the question?
It did, thank you. Great. We've had a few questions come in, and so I'll try to merge them into one question, which is around live coding tests and, pairing with someone and maybe having someone observe you. That's an incredibly daunting situation. I myself, 9 years in as a developer, do not like that situation. No. My mind goes blank and everything I know, I forget. So do you have any advice when you're in that situation, doing a live coding test and, maybe having someone watching you and pairing?
Yeah, thank you. That's a lovely question. Again, I would say, make sure that you have identified your own weak areas. What do I mean by that? You know where you're strong and where you're not. You know where syntactically you forget how to structure a promise or an open API spec. Write it down or grab a screenshot from your code editor, print it out in nice large code, stick it on the wall where you can see it. Because in the meeting, while I've been talking to you, I've been glancing up at a couple of notes I had on the wall, and I hope that it wasn't too distracting for you and you didn't notice. Employ those sorts of skills. And if you run into somebody in your live coding challenge that seems to be fairly argumentative and they have a very stern face on, And they're really not, as you see it, their body language is saying, I don't like what you're doing. Feel free to stop and ask their advice. Say to them, I feel the approach here would be, and explain it before you start coding and see what they say. If they've asked you not to do that, then clearly don't do that. But I am also nervous in live coding challenge. It's something that we all face. And I know that I have to make some notes, that I have to have understood the problem in advance. It may be that they're only going to give you 30 minutes to look at the problem before they expect you to log on to a shared editor somewhere and start coding. But practice as you go along. The first one you may flump just hopelessly, but hopefully that will give you the confidence as you go into the second one or the third one or even the fourth one, that you draw on the experiences of the previous coding challenges you had, and that you understand how to read the person in the room with you when they're eager to give you some help, and when you should stand on your own 2 feet and not ask for every bit of help that's available. So it's a tough cookie to crack. I appreciate that. And I appreciate it's a really nervous thing to do. So I'm sorry I don't have the silver bullet, but yeah, I hope that gave you a flavor of how I would approach it.
Thank you so much. We've had someone ask, what's your thoughts on accepting an offer, but then changing your mind and receiving that offer? What's your thoughts on that?
Great question again. So first of all, be absolutely confident that you are not in danger of the company that you prefer pulling the rug out from under your feet. If you have any inkling that it was the recruiter maybe, or the in-house talent team jokes, oh yeah, we had 10 candidates, and it was by a hair's margin that you got to it, or something along the lines of, that company's hired a bunch of people this year, but 3 roles that we thought were going forward were suddenly stopped for budgetary reasons. Be very sure that you're not going to stumble to the process where you've signed on the line and the managing director or other needs to sign on the line, but they don't. I would say that for me, I would get the contract signed up from the company that I want to move to. I would make sure that I've understood it and I'm really comfortable with all aspects of it. And it's a done deal before I tell the others. Because the last thing you want is to say to be all upfront and be thinking of the other company and be fair to them and say, actually, I've changed my mind. I'm going with this other outfit, this other firm. And then for reasons, both companies don't want to know you. So you say no to the first one and they thought, well, you've gazumped us, so we're not even thinking of you in the future. And there's no way back because we have a no strikes rule. You're done, you're gone. 1 strike and you're out. And the company that you then work with can't sign off because the CEO and the CFO sitting above the person that you have been interviewing with refuse to sign it off because they've got an eye on the company budget. That's happened. I've seen that a number of times. So I hope I don't scare you, but just want to have a bit of reality check because we are facing a tough economic climate where we are at this point in time.
Someone has asked, how would you approach an interview situation where you are not confident that you are experienced enough for the role and or want to ensure that you would have enough support to learn it and not just left floundering?
Great question. We all suffer in a new role or at some point in our existing role from what's called imposter syndrome. And when I talk to this with teams, I like to mention that in an interview not too long ago, somebody as successful as Kylie Minogue even talked about how she had gone through imposter syndrome. And I thought to myself at the time, what the heck? You've sold billions of records. How can you possibly suffer from imposter syndrome when you're facing a live gig? So I would say we all suffer from feelings of not being able to get into the role and be supported enough. If you're wanting to move from into your first junior role, or maybe from a junior role into your first mid-developer role, I would say identify that as you move into the team chats. Expose that gently to the team or to the person that's interviewing you and say something like, how would you approach a person in my situation that's coming into their first role and may not be feeling quite so confident? And what you're looking for there is confirmation that they understand that and that they have a buddy ready for you in the background that you're unaware of. And when you get into the role, if that promised buddy doesn't materialize, I would say to the person that had been hand-holding you in the talent team or your first HR contact, in an interview, I was suggested that I would have a buddy. Is it possible that you could sort that out for me? I agree that this is a tricky situation for you to be in, and I would encourage you to talk to your trusted confidant as you go along and express that to them, whether that's a person inside the business or whether that's a person outside the business. And if your job turns into the most stressful situation ever, let them know that. These days, it's very common for a business to have understood that they need to have processes in place to handle an employee's mental well-being. And this is a stressful situation for you. It's negatively impacting your mental well-being. And it's something that they need to address. And if they're asking you to run before you can walk, and that's your fault because you blagged it in the interview, then please own that and let them know that and say to them, I think I may have oversold myself. I will, and roll out a plan. Say, look, I've seen this training course. I think that would be really beneficial for me. Can we make a little time in the afternoons for me to go and do this? Whatever it is that you think is the remedial action for that, suggest it, because they've invested in you in that interview process. For them to do so again is costly, even in just employee time taken to the interviews. So I would encourage you to flag it and to say, this is what I think. What do you think? And it could be that they are about to say, I'm sorry, we need to let you go because they've identified this. And you bringing this to them is the thing that keeps you within the business.
Amazing, thank you. So someone has said, is there anything specific that you think a recruiter expects to see on your CV? And I think it's particularly relevant maybe for someone who's going for their first technical role. What type of thing do you think someone would expect to see on their CV?
Okay, great question again, thank you. I'm going to, I'm afraid, slightly dodge the bullet here because this is quite an in-depth subject. On the surface of it, it looks like a really easy thing to answer. But when you drill into it, it's quite complicated. And I think we could spend 20 minutes talking about that single subject. So excuse me for dodging the bullet a little. But what I would say is the same as I would say for somebody who's had lots of jobs and feels that maybe their first couple of tech jobs aren't quite so relevant on their CV anymore and they want to trim them down a bit. So the answer is put on the CV things that you feel add value to you as a person through the eyes, through the lens of a recruiter or a company. And that sounds like common sense, but back in the day, we talked about CVs all being in the third person, and now there's a school of thought saying that we write them in the first person. Google that, search it up, and go with the approach that you feel works for you. Talk to the recruiter. They are skilled in pulling together a CV, and they will likely have a way of handling that for you, particularly as a junior role. Even now, I say to the recruiter, here's a PDF of my CV. Would you like it as a Word document? I'd like to know what you edited on it, but I'm very happy for you to make edits and suggestions because they understand the market. And if you've been in a company for a year or even longer, the market may have changed slightly and you don't necessarily understand the nuances of how you can appeal to the rest of the sector through your CV and particularly the business you're trying to approach. If you've no experience at all that's technical, unless you're fresh out of uni and you've never had anything more than a job in McDonald's or hospitality industry, retail industry that you really genuinely don't feel is applicable, I would argue why. I would say, why is that job not applicable? Surely you were part of a team. Surely you helped a customer solve a problem, even if it was just to buy a hamburger. Surely you did that with a smile. What is it about that role that you can highlight without saying, I sold hamburgers, that would help the people in the business that you're approaching understand that you are a team player, that you understand the problem through a customer lens and that you are tenacious and will stick with it until you find that solution, that you're a good problem solver. Coding is about problem solving, right? So if you've solved a problem for a customer in the hospitality industry, retail industry, or other sector, flag that up on your CV. Even though you've no coding experience, you can then draw on that in the conversations.
Thank you so much, Steve. There was so much useful information in there.
Thanks, everybody. I really appreciated the opportunity to be able to present that to you, because my hope with working with Codebar is I can encourage and help anybody into the world of IT. It's a great place to be, and I'm all in favor of as much diversity in IT as we can get. Kudos to all of you for turning up, and thank you for listening to me.